finally, a source of raw, real, and honest information on healthcare issues that matter most. Welcome to BS Free MD. From the latest medical information to how to stay sane as a doctor or a patient, no subject is taboo, no BS is allowed. Now, let's welcome your hosts, Doctors May and Tim Hindmarsh.
All right, everybody. Hello, welcome back. It's Tim and May Hindmarsh, the co-hosts of BS Free MD. We got a really great episode today for you on our podcast. And we have back with us actually two friends. We have Rick Dancer, who is the host of the Get Real with Rick Dancer.
Who's real.
Not
fake, real.
Joining us. And we are going to be sharing an interview with him for the first 20 minutes or so with Dr. Sabine Hazan, who has been on the show before, where we get to talk about the microbiome. Let's talk shit and share with the latest research that she's up to and publications. So without further ado, welcome Rick and welcome Dr. Hazan. Welcome Sabine. All of us to the show. It's a little I don't want to say menage a trois. That sounds really
you
bad,
just said
but
it.
I just said it.
There's four, so you can't be a menage a trois.
That's right. It's a quattro.
A quattro. It's a quattro.
I was going to say welcome to the shit show, which
I have never knew there was a doctor of shit. And I feel like I have arrived. I've interviewed so many people in my career, but never the queen of shit.
Yeah, and I even brought my little statue of me today. So
yes, I love that.
Confusion. It says Dr. Sabine Hazan on there.
And it's a poo with a crown on
it's
a
almost
pedestal.
like a little Oscar.
Yeah, it is.
It's like, I thank my parents for giving me this honor. And I thank my husband for challenging me.
And my biology for making it so that I can go.
Hey, thank God for my microbiome.
So you guys, what does a doctor of poo do? I mean, I know you've been on their show before, but I have never heard of this.
So I analyze fecal material. So in other words, I take a sample that's the size of a fingernail in this little tube with a little spoon. Patients give me a little side of poop that's the size of a fingernail, and we can see all the microbes that are in their gut. And we do essentially forensic medicine. So we analyze, I could tell you what you ate for breakfast, yesterday. I could tell you if you've traveled to Japan. I could tell you just from the microbiome, all the microbes you've been exposed to in a lifetime in one little fingernail of poop. Wow. So we see trillions of bugs, and we see whether they're in balance or if they're out of balance.
Why don't you tell Rick how you get it? So what field of medicine that is, which is gastroenterology, and then how you got into doing what you're doing?
So gastroenterologist is not really an analysis of poop, right? And even infectious disease is not really an analysis of poop, right? Because poop is its own little field. Infectious disease used to do cultures of stools to see if you have like a bacteria that's infecting you or causing you to have diarrhea, for example, but it doesn't analyze to the detail that we analyze. So this is really a new field. I think at some point it's going to have a title, either the fecology or the shitology. I'm going to have to be a shitologist or a fecologist. I don't know. Fecologist is probably going to be better, but eventually it's going to be its own field, because right now we're kind of like at the beginning and we're looking. It's a new frontier. It's really definitely new medicine. Microbiome testing is what the hemoglobin used to be 100 years ago. They didn't even know how to test for blood loss, right? And then they came up with this little, fingertip of blood test that would tell you, hey, you lost blood and your hemoglobin is 7. Now you need to have a blood transfusion, right? Same thing with the microbiome. The microbiome is really at the infancy, but it's going to eventually tell us, hey, you're missing XYZ microbes and you need to replenish XYZ microbes, right? That's going to be the future.
So why do you, Tim and May already know this, I'm sure, but so what, if I came in there, I mean, I know they do stool samples and stuff like that, but what are you looking for? I mean, what can you tell from my poo?
So I'm looking for, so first of all, the research of the microbiome is all research. Okay. There's anybody that's selling you a consumer product is really selling you crap, because we're not there yet. And we're not there because when I tell you, well, you've got a lot of Bacteroides in your gut, what does that mean to you? Nothing.
Right.
And to the doctor that's on the front line taking care of you, that means even less than nothing, right? Because there's no data. I'll give you an example. There's a bacteria called Blautia, Blautia. And that was a bacteria that we discovered as we were looking at stools. And little by little, in certain diseases, it took, some form. Like we started seeing a lot more of it, right? And then there's another one, Rosaburia, that we were seeing a lot of it in different diseases, right? But if you Google those two bugs, there's really nothing on it, right? So we are writing the clinical indication. We're writing the dictionary at Progenibiome of what these bugs mean. So in other words, you go to get your stool tested and you have no idea what Blautia is and why you have Blautia and your neighbor doesn't, or the normals that they call the normals, they don't. But for you, it may be that you were born in Bangladesh, for example, and there's a high level of Blautia in Bangladesh, right? So all these bugs have a specificity of where they're from, and you having them in your gut may be normal, may be abnormal. What's beautiful about it is there are some bugs that are really toxic, right? Like Clostridium difficile, which secretes toxins and causes diarrhea.
No, I don't want that. No.
Yeah, or Mycoplasma, which doesn't even have a cell wall to pick it up, or ticks, Borrelia, Bartonella, bugs that are, that patients have a lot of problems with. So we can actually see these bugs, right, for the first time, and we're seeing what they're doing with other bugs. So that's the new field. That's seeing, a specific bug that's overgrown, and then seeing what bugs are being missed. And then when you look at the bugs that are being missed, you go, well, could that be the reason this person has this condition and this condition?
Oh.
So in the future, there's going to be a test where you are going to be looking potentially at the microbiome as a marker of susceptibility, right? What we showed from COVID is that people that had severe COVID had loss of bifidobacteria, which is your $1 trillion industry of probiotics. And people that were exposed to COVID but never had COVID had a lot of bifidobacteria in their gut. So your stool became a test that could give a susceptibility marker to whether you are at risk for catching COVID or not, and have severe COVID or not. So that's
really like just what's in your poo.
What's in your poo can determine and will determine in the future if you're going to be susceptible to infections, etc. So we're really at the beginning of all this, but it's exciting because we're seeing it. We're seeing also that for the first time, things that we thought, vitamin C, we didn't really know why vitamin C was important, except we knew that it had something to do with immunity, but we really didn't know, right? And now what we showed from our lab is that it increases the bifidobacteria, which is your good microbes. So this technology has the ability to show us what medications do, whether medications are improving you or worsening you, whether medications like antibiotics, we all know antibiotics trash the gut, right? But are they trashing the gut short term, or are they trashing the gut long term? And that's basically what I'm doing.
So why don't you blow everyone's mind and talk a little bit about stool transplant and some of the wild cases you've seen with stool transplant, or what I like to say, a transfusion.
Ooh, that's a new one.
Transfusion. That's funny.
So I'm going to show you a picture. So
is this Tim's poo?
No.
Okay.
Although
good.
Do I have Tim's poo? No.
No, you don't.
No, you don't.
Darn,
Right.
Tim.
I can get you all the poo you would like.
Oh, I know.
I think we all have a lot of Tim's shit.
And while she's doing that,
especially.
I was going to jump in and say, so for the listeners here on your show, Rick, or people that haven't listened before, we did an interview with Sabine back in the end of 2021, One.
Last episode of 2021, Eat Shit and Live.
And it goes
That's our
over
first
her throughout her book and basically paints a picture of what the microbiome is and goes through let's talk shit. And it's all about, it's great. It's written for a lay person, not a medical person. It's filled with humor and puts a light side on things. And it tells you what happens from when you eat to when you excrete your feces, basically, and what the microbiome and all those bacteria in your stomach and your intestines do, and how they're helpful or could be harmful, just like she said, depending on what illness you've had, what antibiotics you're on, or medications or conditions, or maybe you have an underlying disease and that's related to that. So that's a great place to start with that episode.
Right. Absolutely. And the thing that always blows people away is there's more living organisms living inside your gut and on your skin than cells that make you.
Wow.
Yes.
So it's really important that we treat these little buggers correctly.
Right.
And enhance what needs to be enhanced and, potentially decrease what, get into balance and diversity. This show is all about balance and diversity.
Oh yeah. Yes. So Sabine, by knowing, okay, this microbe shouldn't be in there, but I need more of this in there, and finding ways to balance that out, it could help in a lot of different cases that people think they're sick.
Absolutely. So if you look at people with severe COVID, by the way, those are your overweight patients. Those are your diabetics. Those are your Alzheimer's patients. Those are your high risk, right? Population that died from the old people, right? What do those people have in common that made them have risk factors to dying is really what's in their gut. Oh. So if you look at the overweight population, you look at the comorbidities, you look at the Crohn's disease, even inflammatory, they all have, well, not all, but the majority have loss of bifidobacteria, which is a good microbe, which is your $1 trillion industry of probiotics. All these probiotics are because they know that we're lacking bifidobacteria. Okay. So if you know that this person is lacking bifidobacteria, you're going to try to improve the bifidobacteria. So that's why you go to your probiotics to take that, right? So, but is that working? Is that doing the trick, right? So that's basically what we're exploring. We're testing all sorts of probiotics. We're testing all sorts of products out there to see what is improving the bifidobacteria, what is destroying the bifidobacteria, because clearly it's so important. Otherwise, this whole technology of probiotics wouldn't exist. Now, how did we come to this? We came to this because we were treating as gastroenterologists a little bug called Clostridium difficile, which was causing people to have diarrhea. And I was doing clinical trials the whole time for this bug. So I tried to kill it for 25 years.
Wow.
And I wouldn't do fecal transplant right away because who wants to play with poop and mix the poop and implant the poop and it's smelly. So I would put people on, and Tim would, but, and my friend Neil Stolman loved it. He's all over it. And there's what we like to call the biome squad. They love doing that. But Neil, about almost 2 decades ago, said to me, the future is in this and you better get on board with this soon. So I said to him, I'm not playing with poop. I'm going to do clinical trials. So I tried killing this bug through clinical trials. And one clinical trial after another, I wasn't killing the bug. In fact, it became stronger and stronger to the point that one of the doctors got C. diff and he was dying. And, it was about, almost 2 decades ago, but not that long. I can't even, with COVID, everything is a blur now with the years, right? Don't you feel like time stopped with COVID?
Yeah, exactly. It's before COVID and after COVID.
Yeah, that's it. It's like COVID and COVID. I don't know what I did for 4 years. But so this is what happened is that basically, this doctor was dying and I called Neil and I said, Neil, how do you do fecal transplant? Because none of the meds are working for this guy. And he goes, Sabine, figure it out. Read, and if you know anything about my friend Neil, he's all about pushing you to be a scientist. So I figured it out. I did my first fecal transplant. And then the patient went from diarrhea, nearly dying to 100% within a week. And you look back at the colon and you go, wow, this is incredible. So what I would do is I would still try to keep my hands clean, and I would still put patients into clinical trials. And if the clinical trial didn't work, I would do fecal transplant, because I would say to the patient, look, fecal transplant is not covered, at least the clinical trial, they're paying you to be part of it. We're getting paid. Let's then put you into this fecal transplant protocol, right? And so we would do the clinical trial first for a product. And then if the product didn't work, we would go to fecal transplant. When fecal transplant started improving the memory of a patient with Alzheimer's, and the patient remembered his daughter's date of birth, I said, wait a minute.
What?
Stop the press. Something is going on. So I went to, I started making phone calls. Of course, you say this to someone, to another gastroenterologist, they're like, you're crazy. You probably didn't do the mini mental status properly or something. But I'm in the clinical trial business. So I did a clinical trial for Alzheimer's on this patient, and this patient failed to be, he was so severe with a mini mental status of 21 that I knew his mini mental status, and his neurologist had the same mini mental status. When he got C. diff, and I did fecal transplant using his wife's microbiome, that's when 6 months later, he comes in, his mini mental status is 29. And in the mini mental status, there's these two squares and a triangle, and you have to kind of juxtapose them. He barely could draw them the first time. After 6 months post-fecal transplant, he was drawing them perfectly. And by the way, it took years to get that paper published. And at the end, I had to show them the mini mental status of the boxes before and after, so they could believe me, because they didn't believe that I improved it. And so that was one case. Then there was another case of Crohn's disease that I started improving, to the point that I would videotape my patients, because I couldn't even believe it myself. And then I would send it to Neil. I'm like, you won't believe this. Look at this guy. This guy had a CDAI that was, a Crohn's activity index that was in 200. Now he's like dropped to like 10, right? Or fecal calprotectin that was like in the thousands, right? So, those are the cases that you start looking and you start seeing a correlation with what you're doing.
So Sabine, what is this fecal transplant? Are you actually taking someone else's poo and putting it into me?
Correct.
Yes.
So is that, I don't mean, I'm not, we're
you
all
take
doctors
this.
here. So you put it in there behind, like?
Yes, via colonoscopy.
Oh.
So you prepare it. So this is my poo, for example.
It looks like a good slushy.
Can you take the eyes off before you put that in there? I don't want him looking around.
That's not my poo. Okay, we'll pretend this is my poo. We basically, we make it as clean as possible, essentially. First of all, we test it. We make sure there's no vancomycin-resistant E. coli, there's no Clostridium difficile in it, there's no E. coli, there's no Shigella, nothing, right? So we test it to make sure it's like pure, balanced microbiome. We go a step ahead because we actually test the microbiome on every donor. From there, we process it, and then we put the patient via colonoscopy, and we implant it directly into the cecum.
Huh.
And so it's basically like a slush, you slush it, and then you inject it by syringe directly into the cecum after you wash the colon, after you, cleaned off everything. And then you wait for it to grow. So it's like a new fertilizer, right?
It's
so
like a sourdough starter.
Yeah. Well, they used to do, they did, Rick, you'll love this. They used to do these.
Sorry, Rick's going to drop dead of laughter.
Rick is like passing out.
Sourdough starter.
Yeah. They used to do these through a nasal gastric tube into your.
That's how we saw them done when we were in med school back.
So through your stomach, into your small intestine, through your nose.
We would see the shit going in through a tube, literally. It was gross.
So that just readjusts your whole system then. So because yours is, you have a faulty poo system.
For C. diff, in order to have C. diff, you have to assume that you have an imbalance, right? Because C. diff doesn't just grow by itself. It grows because your microbiome is out of whack. It's out of balance, right? So essentially it penetrates and it goes in, and it's like a weed, it starts taking over the grass. So you got to kill C. diff first. So you find the bug, C. diff, you kill the bug with some vancomycin just to kill off everything, kind of like removing the weeds. and then you plant new seeds with new compost, and then you let it grow.
That is amazing. I mean, honestly, so in
Well,
a few years, I will be going into the doctor. Like you could go in, and if you had an issue, they might not only just check your blood, but they check your stool and say your shit's not right.
It's not hard to imagine that in a few years they could say, from your stools. Look, we already know from your stools whether you are at high risk of having colon cancer or not, right? I mean, we've got these poop in the bucket. You send it off, and then they tell you low risk for cancer, or yes, you have a risk for cancer. But this is what the most amazing thing that happened. So a lot of us that were doing fecal transplant, we call ourselves the Biome Squad, because we're like a group of doctors, superheroes, playing with poop to save lives. So there you go. What else? So Colleen Kelly did this case that was published in the Journal of American College of Gastro. And so essentially what you see is 2 patients with alopecia areata.
So hair loss.
Transplant, the patient grew hair.
Wow,
so
that's
you have
crazy.
to say, what grew hair, right?
Right.
And when you see that, you go, wait a minute, is there something that's helping with growth? So that was when I like lit up, because I was like, well, I've got a ton of hair. Maybe there's a microbe in
yes,
me.
you do.
Maybe there's a microbe in me that I could culture and sell it, So that was my mind. I was like, oh, maybe there's something in my poop that's like giving me hair, right? So that was the first thing. And then the second thing was, I started seeing in my office clinical trials on poop in capsules. I kid you not, before COVID. And it was like poop from Korea, poop from China, poop from Minneapolis, and then etc.
Montana poop.
And I said, yes. And I said, we're in the poop business and we have no idea what the hell we're doing. And so at the same time, if you'll remember, there was a company called Ubiome.
Mm-hmm.
So Ubiome was selling kits everywhere. And it didn't make sense to me, because I was like, wait, first of all, we're trying the clinical trials on poop for like C. diff from every country. And now we're selling stool kits, but we have no idea what Blottia means. We have no idea what Bacteroides vulgaris does, Roseburia. So to me, I felt like, wow, there's a whole shit show going on out there that nobody has any clue what's going on. And I better step in it to give it some validity, right? And so I basically said, well, look, I'm in the clinical trial business. I have a portal with the FDA. I do fecal transplant. And my partners, all my colleagues and everything are all doing that. Surely as a group of doctors, we could figure this out, and at least spearhead the world properly into, understanding. Because what we saw from Ubiome is they were it was a big Ponzi scheme. They were selling kits all over the world, and they were basically comparing you to mice poop. And also they double billed, triple billed insurances. I'm not even sure how insurances were accredited to build a stool test that was not even a clinical test by the American College of Gastro or by the infectious disease groups or etc. So it was very interesting how the whole Ponzi scheme started like getting into the lab, and then the doctors were kind of kept out of the loop, right? I mean, here we are, we're treating patients. And I was the first one to get all this because I was in Malibu. So all my patients are very, very connected. And so they always come to me they always challenge me, I should say.
With the rich shit?
Yes.
Well, not only the rich shit, but it's like, what do you mean you didn't test? Don't you know about Ubiome? And I'm like, Ubiome, what? So then I would look at these results and I'm like, what does that mean? They're like, well, I don't know. I'm expecting you to tell me.
Right. So it would be like you'd order this, you do this test, and they would send you results, but you're like, exactly. So I have this and this and this bacteria, but is that good? Is it bad? Does it mean I'm going to die? Do I do anything about it? But it's not helpful information if you don't know what any of it means.
It was a scam to the highest level. And all of us as doctors, because we would get all these patients, and they would get mad at us because they would say, what do you mean you don't know? You're so behind the curve. I'm like, I'm behind the curve. I'm the one treating you guys.
I am the curve.
That's
Right.
right. Exactly.
Well,
I'm the one doing the clinical trials. I mean, it doesn't get, in front of the curve as anybody, right?
So Sabine, let me ask you two things real fast. One, how do people get your book? And then two,
Amazon.
Yes.
on Amazon, it's called Let's Talk Shit.
Yes.
Mhm.
And then Tim and May, what are you going to continue this conversation on that my viewers can then tune into your show on Spotify or any of those major channels like that to find out more? Sabine, I'll have you on again anytime on my show.
My pleasure.
I love your shit. I just
Oh, thank you.
So tell them how they can get a hold of that.
Well, we're going to continue this conversation for the rest of our podcast that'll be out, and we're going to get into her latest research. I know she's done some publication on the link between autism and also her company, which is Progenobiome, which you can look up progenobiome.com, right? Is researching people's stool. And do you have a trial going on now about people that weren't infected with COVID, that weren't vaccinated, that you are looking for poo to test? So
yes, I call them the golden poo. So golden poo, come to me, send it to me. We send you a kit, but first we register. So register on progenobiome.com.
Mm-hmm.
And then we call you. We're going to call you to question you to make sure you don't have antibodies for COVID, that you've never had COVID. We want the people that never had COVID, didn't take any medications, and were not vaccinated, because that's the resilient microbiome that I like to call it.
Perfect. Wow. So you can be part of that. Go to her website at progenobiome.com to check it out if you're interested. And also look for her book, Let's Talk Shit by Dr. Sabine Hazan, Hazan. And the rest of the conversation as we dive a little deeper into the poo story is on the rest of the podcast. Yeah. So thanks for tuning in, Rick.
Thanks,
Rick. Nice
Sabine. It was nice to meet you, and I look forward to watching the rest of this on their show. That's exciting. I'm going to go home, and the first thing I'm going to tell my wife is we need to get our shit checked.
Absolutely.
Or together. We need to get our shit together.
That's my thing.
Get your shit together.
May's been telling me that for 32 years.
Here's a Valentine's present.
Yeah. Hey, by the way, Rick, you know what you could say is you could tell your wife, Sabine told me to be nice to you because I may need your shit.
That's right.
I'm going to use it all.
There you go.
Thanks, you guys.
All right. Bye, Rick. All right. So, Sabine, why don't you, let's see, go ahead. And I'm super excited to hear what came out. Was before Christmas, correct? What you published?
Yes, in October.
Right. So why don't you tell the listeners what's going on with that research?
Yeah, so I'm going to
microbiome.
I'm going to go back. So if you remember, we found COVID in the stools April 2020. Mm-hmm. We published it. It took like 6 months to get published, January 21. While we found COVID in the stools, we also discovered that the people that had severe COVID had zero bifidobacteria. And the people that were high risk exposed to COVID had a lot of bifidobacteria in their gut. So we kind of hypothesized that bifidobacteria was very important to fight COVID and to survive COVID. And why was vitamin C and vitamin D so important? Because actually vitamin C and vitamin D increases your bifidobacteria in your gut. So they act as nutrients to your good microbiome. So you got to feed these microbes good stuff. We also discovered that there's a lot of stuff that kills your bifidobacteria. If you drink a lot of wine, if you drink a lot of coffee, obviously 1 cup of coffee improves your microbiome. One cup of wine improves, but if you drink a ton, it may not be to your benefit, right? So stress, etc., worsens. Intermittent fasting increases your bifidobacteria, so that's a good thing.
He's looking at me. Tim's making faces.
Helps. Right. So those were the discoveries we made throughout the pandemic. The other thing we discovered is ivermectin, if you recall, the horse paste that they talked about, that was safe for babies with scabies, but dangerous for dying patients with oxygens in the 80s.
Right. So dumb.
So dumb. So what is that? It's a fermented product of a bacteria called Streptomyces, which is the same as bifidobacteria in the same phylum. And so Streptomyces essentially could be, that fermentation product could be feeding the bifidobacteria during the time of hypoxia, where you need your bifidobacteria to fight COVID. So that was a hypothesis that I made. It got tremendously criticized. Some of the criticisms were, well, why did you use papers that said that ivermectin is working for COVID? And I said, why wouldn't I use papers that say, I mean, it's a hypothesis. I'm allowed to use whatever I want to use.
Exactly.
That makes my hypothesis a hypothesis, right? So that was one thing. The other thing is, of course, they tried with every level to basically remove that paper. They even put like a letter of notice or whatever they call it. And to me, I was like, you know what? If they remove this hypothesis, then it shows that the whole entire peer review and the whole entire medical journal is flawed. Because it's one thing to remove a placebo-controlled trial that you didn't believe the methods were done properly, or there was no supervision, or etc. It is another thing to remove a hypothesis, which is the idea of one physician on the front line of why possibly ivermectin worked for COVID, right? So that was the big controversy. And then what happened is, as we were looking at ivermectin, as we were looking at vitamin C, vitamin D, increasing the bifidobacteria, as we were looking at, the old microbiome versus the young, the babies who had a ton of bifidobacteria, the old had very little, and then why some old people have a lot of bifidobacteria comes out, they're taking some vitamins and they're doing the right thing, right? So as we were looking at all this, we realized, and of course, bifidobacteria is in this book, and that was pre-COVID. So I had a gut feeling about it from the beginning. But as we look at all this, we decided to look at vaccination, right? Because at the beginning, I was getting pressure from my family about the vaccination. Everybody was asking me, should we get vaccinated? Shouldn't we? I'm like, I'm not finished my research yet. So what I did is I would take 34, I think we took 34, 35 patients that were pre-vaccination. We had their stools. And then we tested them a month after vaccination. And we discovered that the microbiome changed, and not necessarily for the good. The bifidobacteria started disappearing. And then when we started looking at people that were deemed vaccine injured, same thing, the bifidobacteria was disappearing. And then the other thing that we discovered is that not only did it disappear, is it dropping within a month, but the persistence of the drop in 4 patients occurred 90 days later. So bifidobacteria started like a million, and then 90 days later in those patients, it was still persisting. And of course, the data that came out with, that obviously was shadow banned, that talks about the persistence of the spike protein in the body, right?
Mhm.
So is this with the 2? I have to stop for a minute. Is this with the 2 shots or just one?
This is with the 2 shots. So
2
they
shots.
basically had the first shot, and then they had the second shot.
Okay.
And so we followed them for 90 days. And then during post 90 days, they were still persisting and dropping. And in fact, all 4 of them dropped to 0 bifidobacteria, which was incredible because these were like physicians on the front line, right? So that was pretty consistent. What was interesting is one of the patients on constant vitamins every single day. So the fact that we know vitamins are vitamin C and vitamin D increase your bifidobacteria, and he kept dropping regardless of being on the vitamins. That's something that put a red flag on me, because I said, what is killing? Because to me, that's called bacteriophage, right? That's killing of your bacteria in your microbiome. And there's data that's going to be coming out on the vaccine injured that we're going to be showing, but in the vaccine injured, there's things that are very concerning. So I knew I couldn't publish this because I'm already having a lot of trouble publishing, forget high impact journals, but even like impacts of 6, 7, 8. It's very difficult when you publish on topics like ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine. So I can't even publish on that. But imagine publishing something that goes against the narrative with vaccines.
Mm-hmm.
That's even a bigger problem. And so I knew I couldn't go that route and it wouldn't get the word out. So I basically presented it at the American College of Gastro. And I was actually shocked that they accepted it, because I thought, well, the American College of Gastro has a lot of, influence, and, they need to be politically correct in a way. And so they accepted it. And then actually the poster, won best poster research at the American College of Gastro in October.
That's exciting.
So, yeah. So it did, and actually, it was interesting because there was a pharmaceutical company rep that was there. And he said, well, this kind of study will will create more vaccine hesitancy. And I was like, oh yeah, let me stop research because I'm creating vaccine hesitancy. I mean, really, what kind of crap is that?
It's like saying lung cancer from smoking is going to create tobacco hesitancy. Oh dear.
Yeah, don't talk about it because you're going to cut down on the profits of the cigarettes.
Exactly, right?
I mean, that's exactly what this guy was saying, essentially,
yeah,
to
absolutely.
me. And but the people that were looking at the poster said it was amazing research, and it actually, because nobody did it, nobody even thought about doing it, and I did it. I spent my money. I don't have any skin in the game. I don't have any stocks in Pfizer or Moderna. Yes, I own Progenibiome, but we're a research center that's cracking the code of the microbiome. I'm so thankful every day for having created this lab because it saved my life during the pandemic. That's all I can say.
And I'm just thinking, we interviewed Dr. Paul Thomas. He's been on our show twice, who is a pediatrician in Portland, who now has no medical license in Oregon because he collected data on his pediatric practice of those who received vaccinations, those who didn't, and those who had a staggered vaccine program throughout their childhood. And the findings that he found were just published it. And the board came after him because the results were not in favor of the narrative for the vaccine schedule.
Yeah, well, he published that the Safe Vaccine Program, or I forget the name of his book. And within 4 days, they had pulled his license. They had an emergency meeting, and all he was saying is maybe we should space out childhood vaccines. Right. Maybe we should ask some questions about what are they really changing all-cause mortality? They're definitely
that's why I did the research with the college, because I felt, if I'm full of it, then I'll admit it, I'm full of it. But if there's something to it, then who better than my peers to tell me, especially this kind of research. This is forensics of the gut. You can't fake that research. I mean, it's like you either have the genetic sequence of your microbiome before and after, or you don't, and it's so specific. It's like, it's a fingerprint of your microbiome. So it's not like you can alter and all of a sudden remove the bifidobacteria. I mean, this is the way it is, right? So
what happened after? Did you test anyone past 90 days to see if it kept
declining?
We're
testing. I'm not going to spoil it because it's basically going to be published. But, obviously I wouldn't be speaking if I didn't know something that,
I'm curious, so is it start to rise?
No, listen, I wake up early and I go to sleep really late because I feel that we're demolishing the microbiome of humanity. I feel that we, in 10, 20 years from now, 1 in 1 kid's going to be autistic. And then we're not going to have any future kids. This is my vision right now, from what I'm seeing of the demolition of the microbiome that we're doing.
So here, we talked about that before, about
how
it's destroyed. And
to quote Miley Cyrus, what is the wrecking ball to the that's the question, right? Because if we're destroying it, something's destroying it. And my guess is it's a whole bunch of things.
A whole bunch of things, yes.
It's
not a one thing, but it's cumulative, right? It's like you add one thing and then another and another. And at some point, you got to stop the destruction of these bugs. These bugs are allowing us to live, right? If you look at the microbiome of Africa or the Amazon jungle, it's completely different than someone that lives in New York or someone that lives in California. We've lost a ton of microbes in our guts from all this sterility on foods, pesticides on salads, antibiotics galore on everything. And now if the vaccines are causing some damages to the microbiome, we also need to see why. And why is it causing damages in the microbiome of some people and not others? Because that's the other thing, right? There are some people, a small percentage, that are resilient to damages, right? From vaccines or from antibiotics. Like not everybody gets C. diff, for example, from antibiotics.
Right.
But to the one that gets it, that's a problem, right? It doesn't matter that the rate is, 1 in 26,000. If you're the one, then it might as well be 100% for anything, right?
Right.
No, absolutely.
No, I think
we do colonoscopies for less, right?
Oh yeah, no, for sure. Yeah. No, but it's super fascinating because in this, last 2.5, almost 3 years that we've been podcasting, we've interviewed, our eyes have been open to so much because we've been willing to interview people that, were, actually disagreed with most of our training and disagreed with virtually everything I did when I was, practicing much more full time than I am now. And I'm like, holy crap, we got a lot wrong. And
holy crap, I like that.
Holy shit, yeah. So it's the thing that's super interesting when so we have a colleague that is a writer that asks us for some opinions every once in a while, and she was we're getting ready to write a letter to her about Ozempic and Wegovy. So Wegovy, the GLP-1 agonist
that they're using for weight loss or for diabetes.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. So you look at it, and what struck me is I was doing some research and looking at the studies, and the BMJ put a very nice kind of synopsis of the 2 or 3 studies that they did on this. And the thing that hit me is it said worldwide. Okay, this wasn't just the United States. I would completely believe if it was United States, Canada, Mexico, whatever. Worldwide, overweight and obesity has gone up by 300% in prevalence since 1970. 300%. So in my head, I think, okay, well, obviously the solution is a $1,300 a month injection that only causes 40% of the people to lose 5% of their body mass. That's obviously the solution. No, the solution is, what the hell are we doing that caused a 300% increase in obesity?
Right. I'll tell you what we're doing. We're killing the microbiome that is helping you metabolize. That's what we're doing. So, and the fact is, you could see that from the studies where you look at fecal transplant, and they took skinny mouse into fat mice, and the fat mice became skinny, and vice versa, fat mice to skinny mice became fat. So obviously we are killing the microbiome. I call that globalization. With globalization comes globesity. There's and not only globesity is just one look, right? COVID happened because high obesity around the world, right? I mean, that's your prime population that's getting COVID, is your overweight, morbidly obese patients, especially in the kids. Morbidly obese kids were the ones that were affected from COVID. But it's not only obesity, it's autism. In 1980, the rate of autism was 1 in 2,000. Now it's 1 in 30 in some areas of the States. And in India, of all places, what boggles my mind is, and I get this all the time because I have people that are from India and come to my office, and they basically all of a sudden have celiac sprue. And I tell them, well, you have celiac sprue. And they say, I'm from India. We don't have celiac sprue. Well, guess what? You do have celiac sprue now because you've globalized yourself to become, we've created this world of, instead of keeping the microbiome specific to an area, we are now, globalizing all that. Think about Costco, right? Tomatoes, doesn't matter the season, right? Back in the days, and in France, actually still, you cannot have tomatoes in winter because they say, are you kidding? It's out of season. But in America, you can have tomatoes 24/7 because they come from other areas of the world. Now, is that good for your microbiome to inherit those microbes? Or should those microbes be in that temperature, in that climate? And is that what's creating a whole big problem even in the world, with the, are we losing microbes that are potentially decomposing plastic? So bifidobacteria, the trillion-dollar industry of probiotics, decomposes plastic. Who knew? Until you take a bunch of probiotics on plastic and you realize, wait a minute, it's decomposing plastic. So is there a loss of bifidobacteria in the world? And that's why we're having a problem? I mean, you got to think of that. And then what about all the foods, all that are full of antibiotics that we're just dumping into the septics, into the dirt? All that plays a role. We're overutilizing the planet. We're overkilling. And then we wonder, why do we have obesity around the world? Why do we have increased COVID? Why are people dying from COVID? Well,
you know,
I like that point about the globalization, because you're right. It did. Yeah, I used to laugh when I did mission trips or was traveling, and I would be in the middle of Mongolia and there's a McDonald's. I'm like, how does this happen? And like, why do they want this? But now you're right. I can get blueberries from Peru in January, or you can get whatever from any country. And this mixing of all things,
but
food and travel
Right.
of people and illness, and
and what are they doing to those blueberries when they come from
yes,
Peru to America? Are they sterilizing them, and therefore are they killing
Right.
the microbes?
right.
no, but I
Or
think,
what's in their soil that I'm
Yeah,
eating that
of
I shouldn't
course.
be. That's,
but
yeah.
so I've come up with a concept, and you can tell me if I'm full of shit. But I call it peak germ theory. So you know how we had, you know, this whole idea of peak oil. We're going to use up all the resources of oil in the world, but somehow that, you know, that started 50 years ago in 1973. It never really happened. But I think we've hit peak germ theory. So if you look at allopathic medicine, the whole concept of germs are bad. And when germ theory started, that was a really, really good life-saving thing. So make sure that your water pumps aren't filled with cholera. Make sure
Right.
that you have sewage systems so you're not getting dysentery to your babies.
Right.
You know, throw Mary Mellon in jail because she has typhoid.
Right. Right.
And so then
We've
what
gone
happened?
overboard. We've
Right.
gone
So then,
overboard.
right. So then but we've built an entire industry on seek
Yes.
and destroy germs.
Yes.
And I think it goes all the way to viruses, because
Yes.
there's 4 quadrillion viruses in the world. Virtually
Yes.
all of them are non-pathogenic.
So you're saying wiping out viruses?
I'm
with
saying wiping out
vaccines could be bad.
I'm saying there is a balance here that
Yes,
we are
you're killing the
completely
balance.
losing, because allopathic medicine is seek and destroy. And so, you know, this whole concept of viral, I never learned this. I mean, COVID gave me an education, that's for damn sure. But if you look at this whole concept of viral displacement, that on average, about 10% of people in your population have a rhinovirus at once.
Right.
Well, what that does is that suppresses RSV, that suppresses pertussis.
Correct.
It suppresses all of this other stuff. So you have a very mild virus that cranks up your immune system, trains it, and makes sure that you don't get the really nasty stuff. Well,
Correct.
it's the same thing
It's
with
your vaccine. It's your
Yes.
natural vaccine.
right. But
Except it's made by the body.
right. And so we've hit peak germ theory. Like, we have to think about it different. And when I heard, what was his name? Peter Abbe from you know, him and his wife that have done the you know, vaccine research, and he has this 10-minute video. I don't even know where I watched it. And he said, we have to look at vaccines not as disease eradicators, but as immune modulators. And
Yes, that's what they're
completely
supposed to be.
change,
Right.
because they are immune modulators. That's
No, that's what they are. That's what they're supposed to be. That's what they are. It just makes a difference when the vaccine is basically a new technology that is mimicking, that is not a real virus, right? That is mimicking a spike protein that's not even real, in my opinion, right? So you have a synthetic spike protein that you're trying to create a vaccine for a synthetic spike protein. I mean, that doesn't make sense, right?
No. And then I think, you know, we've talked about this before, but even looking at food as immune modulators, because what you put in your mouth is going to get digested, affect your microbiome. I mean, we preach that. We've been preaching what you know, you are what you eat forever. But I think
100%.
the movement's really starting now, where people are more focused on getting back to quality food.
Yeah, no, you know what was really fascinating to me is when I looked at my stools and I discovered I had Clostridium difficile in my stools, the sequence, not 1 copy, 2 copies, but like thousands of copies. And I said to myself, wait, I don't have any GI symptoms. How could I possibly have C. diff? Maybe C. diff is a normal inhabitant of my gut. Why do I even need to bother? So then I started looking at my husband, but I kept thinking, well, I probably colonized myself by evaluating my patients, you know, and I'm treating C. diff. So maybe that's why I got it. Then I tested my whole staff. Everybody had C. diff in their gut. Then I tested my husband, my kids, they had C. diff in their gut, non-toxigenic, just the fingerprint of multiple bugs of C. diff. And then I decided, you know what? I'm going to look at the GI doctors because they do fecal transplant, compared them to the rest of the doctors. Well, there was no clinically significant, it wasn't clinically significant. So it didn't really matter. So that's when I realized, you know what, C. diff is probably part of our fingerprint. And that's when I realized, I think what we've done is we kill off all the families of C. diff and we just leave it alone to start flourishing, because you've killed off all these families all around it, right? So that was my approach to C. diff. And that's how I realized that if you're in balance, you're okay. C. diff is not going to bug you. But I think if you're out of balance, C. diff might start secreting its toxin and want to kill you. And it's funny because I had, a doctor at the NIH said to me, that doesn't make sense. Why would a bug that's in your gut want to kill you? And I said, well, bugs are designed to kill us. The process of aging, the process of death is really these super bugs that get super and start decomposing our bodies and puts us back into the earth, right? So there are bugs in our bodies that are just, their purpose is to decompose us and put us back into the earth.
Exactly.
Wouldn't we want to know about which bugs those are before we get decomposed? I mean, to me, it should be like every money, every focus from politics to businessmen should be on this, because you want to live longer. It doesn't matter that you've got a palace on the beach if you do not have your health. So every focus should be on how do we live longer? How do we live better? How do we make sure our kids continue to live longer and that we don't have one-on-one autistic child in the future? Because that's what wakes me up at night. So yes, the research is controversial. Yes, it's showing something that nobody wants to hear because it cuts down on their stocks, on their stocks. But guess what? The stockbrokers right now are the ones calling me with their vaccine injuries. So, I tend to think maybe it's time to pay attention to the microbiome, because it's not all.
Are you doing any research aside from what's happening with the vaccines and COVID into things like autism anymore, or Alzheimer's, or any of the?
Oh yeah, so we're publishing our first paper where we have a kid that improved, and his microbiome improved and sustained improvement post fecal transplant, and then we have another 30 kids that we're going to be submitting. We submitted to the FDA. We're waiting for the FDA to give us the green light. And then we submitted a protocol for Parkinson's. So I think we've isolated something in Parkinson's that I'm excited about. So we're going to be publishing that. That's going to be exciting. Parkinson's patients, if you look at Parkinson's, they had constipation years before developing symptoms of Parkinson's. So it was a GI problem to begin with from the beginning. It was just hard to prove. But now with this technology, we can kind of see that even Parkinson's has a microbiome fingerprint.
I'm going to ask a weird question. Maybe you don't know anything about it, but there's a big focus now on, aside from the vitamin C, D, magnesium. All these health people are pushing that. Most people are deficient in magnesium, how important it is, for gut health, and it plays a big role in your GI system. If anyone's overdosed on magnesium, you know what happens. You get the shits. Is there any correlation that of between magnesium and the microbiome?
Well, I think again, even all these vitamins are, there's a certain dosage that you shouldn't go above, because then it overdoes it and probably kills some of the bad stuff. Remember, our colon is a waste, right? So you have, and I don't think people understand this, but when you look at the colon, the cecum, which is the beginning of your colon, works backwards, right? So the motion, it doesn't go forward, it goes backwards. It kind of acts like a compost bin. So it's almost the compost bin of your colon. And then once you pass to the transverse colon motion and sigmoid goes down to expel. So it's almost, you've got this backwash in the cecum, and it's figuring out, okay, this microbe's bad, let's get rid of it. This is bad, let's get rid of it. And then you've got the transverse colon and sigmoid that's releasing. So I think, the colon has a huge role in digestion and metabolism. And that's why we need to look at the microbiome. And by the way, the microbiome is different when you look at the cecum versus when you look at, the evacuation from the stools in the rectum. So that data is coming as well. We have a lot of data, but it's just publications are tough.
So this is going to be another crazy. I thought of all these crazy questions we get asked, and I see online all the time. So what about these things that I see a lot of Hollywood types and famous people
I know where you're
doing?
going.
These coffee enema things to cleanse their colon, and even some high-end athletes, Olympic level athletes. I'm like, what the heck are you doing? Like, you think you'd be getting some good advice. So how does that destroy your microbiome?
So there's two train of thoughts, right? You can live in a sterile environment, but once you leave the sterile environment and you go to an unsterile area, you're a sitting duck, right? So you need to always be in that bubble, right? So you think of people like, that are germ phobic. He wants the planet to be germ free because he's germ phobic and he is himself in a sterile environment, right? Now, you can live with a sterile, and vice versa. The person that's on the streets and that's homeless, you don't see them with COVID, right? They're surviving. They're surviving in those temperatures. They're surviving without food. They're surviving
with nasty
that
infections.
resilience. Yeah. I mean, they have issues, but they are resilient in that they are not catching what a sterile person will catch, right? So if you think about the colon, it's the same thing. You can live with a clean colon, but you got to always keep up the cleanliness, right? So the problem with these coffee enemas is, well, while they're probably great and making them feel great, unfortunately, it's not sustainable. You got to keep doing them. And once you stop, you're sitting duck, right? So it's the same thing as once you've killed off microbes with antibiotics, you feel great. But then slowly, bad bugs are creeping in and you no longer have the defense because you've killed it. And so now the bad bugs are climbing up, the good bugs are down. So how do you replenish yourself when you've lived in a sterile environment and you've lost all those microbes? Yes, you become a germ phobic because you know that germs are going to kill you because you do not have the strength, the gut strength to fight it, right? And you've seen, so right. When you talk about these celebrities, a lot of them are the most germ phobic ever. They live in a bubble in a sterile environment, and they've never touched the ground, they've never planted anything. They have everything catered for them, and so because of that, they're a bit secluded and living in a bubble. Once you leave that bubble, you get yourself into problem.
Right. That totally makes sense.
Yeah, but we're seeing it. I mean, I'm still seeing patients actively in a primary and urgent care setting. And it's they're like, how come my kid got sick so many times this year? I'm like, well, because we put their immune system on pause for 2 years. What do you think's going to happen? It's not magic.
You keep a kid in a classroom and you sterilize him constantly. You put him in a mask and you basically alcohol swab the heck out of him 4 or 5 times a day. And then you don't let him go play outside or breathe in or feed in the earth. You're going to have a kid that's sick. And we've seen those studies with kids that are playing in kindergarten in the garden and they don't have ear infections, but kids that are in the classroom have increased, ear infections.
Yeah, well, we're gonna look back at this hopefully sooner than later. That the only thing worse public health wise than the vaccine was the shutdown.
I think so. I think that was a big mistake. I mean, if you think of the bubonic plague, they didn't shut down the world. If you think of yellow fever, they didn't shut down the world, and yet people still survived and humanity still survived. I think shutting down the world probably at the beginning was a good idea for a couple months to just kind of get our bearings and kind of say, because I was one of those that was like, stop talking to me, stop panicking, leave the people at home, let me figure it out, right? Let me look in my lab, etc. But I think, shutting down the world for like a couple years or people having fear, that was not a good idea in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And that's exactly it. It's just, it's this,
what's a cost benefit ratio,
there's been what, however many million years of humans interacting with each other, but now it's really bad.
Right.
Like if a pandemic was going to wipe out humanity, I'm pretty sure it would have been a couple 100,000 years ago.
Right. What was crazy is my husband's a physician and his father ended up in the hospital in Houston And, my husband flew to the hospital and stayed with his dad because he's a physician and he didn't wear a mask, and he's, in the cafeteria back and forth. And that was at the peak of Delta, right? My husband was perfectly fine. And, the whole time I think of and thank God he was able to have, my father-in-law passed away from a terminal cancer, which really, I discovered so much about the microbiome just from his case. But what I was going to say is that he was in that hospital setting. At least his father got to spend time with his son in his last days of life. How many, parents went into the hospital and didn't even get to say goodbye to their kids, and were just, secluded. That was not okay. That was not okay.
Well, it happened to me.
That happened to him.
My mother was 92 years old. So, the clock is ticking, and she was essentially in COVID jail for, that whole 18 months, in an assisted living facility because they couldn't leave. And then she got, a terminal illness, which happens.
Which they blamed on her having COVID. They said, she was recovering. Right. She did get COVID, believe it or not, and recovered. Was doing great. And then she had symptoms, and they said, it's just post-COVID nausea. It's just post-COVID.
Right. Well, so she ends up with this catastrophic infection in her gallbladder. And I'm like, well, they're not going to do anything. They can't get, this is it. This is the terminal event. Right. And so my brother lives, my mother lives in Canada. My brother and I live down here. Couldn't visit, couldn't go to the funeral, like nothing. And you sit there and you just go, for what? I mean, I'm watching this graveside service online, and it's 15-mile-an-hour winds in a bright sunshine.
Oh my God, I know.
And everyone's wearing masks. And, I know. And this is like, April of 2020, 21. Right. And it's just like you can't even make it up. It's after a year after all this crap started, and we're still doing it.
And meanwhile, I went to the funeral of my father-in-law because he passed away during COVID, and I was fine. And my husband stayed in the hospital with him, and he was fine. It's the hypocrisy and the paranoia that went on was just crazy. And I think it stopped our freedoms. And what we learned from COVID is how fast our freedom can just be taken away from us in a second, that they could just implant anything they want in your body and you have no say, no freedom. I mean, freedom is something people die for, right? I mean, that's to me, that's the essence of humanity, is don't take away my freedom. You could take away my money with taxes, you could take away whatever, but don't take away my freedom to make decisions for myself, because that's the whole point of living.
Right. Absolutely.
Right. No, and that's, I mean, and the other thing I think that's even more terrifying is how willingly people will give it up.
Yeah.
And for what amounted to most people to be the sniffles. I'm not saying COVID didn't exist.
Right.
I've had really, really sick patients that I've treated.
Well, we've had COVID really
We've
badly.
had COVID, and I get it. I get it. I'm not trying to downplay that, but let's be honest. For most people, it was an irritation and an inconvenience. Right. It was not a life-altering event.
Right.
And bad things happen just because of daily life. People get killed in car wrecks, and
car accidents,
young people,
earthquakes, hurricanes. I mean, you name it, it's just, I think it went a little bit overboard. And I think, yes, people died, but then I look at, my role of patients. No one died on my shift. And I have to say, looking back, obviously something was done wrong if nobody died on my shift. And I know all the doctors that treated, very few people died on their shift. Something really was done wrong if we achieved success and the rest of the doctors were not, right? Because when you look at, bringing a patient in the intensive care unit and putting him on an intubator, well, that didn't work out very well, right? Because those people died. So maybe you should have given them some ivermectin and tried. They were already intubated. What do you have to lose, right?
But we're at the point where we can't even talk about, so they don't even want to look at the ones who had no one die on their watch and the groups that were successful. Don't you want to take a look at that cohort to see, well, what were they doing? No. Not even allowed to talk about it.
we have become a society that is paying attention to the data written instead of paying attention to what's being done on the front line, right?
Right.
I don't care if you read, like, think about who was speaking during the pandemic. Dr. Jean, right? How many patients did he see? Did he treat successfully? If you haven't treated a patient successfully, at least 1,000 patients successfully and lost no one, you shouldn't have an opinion on COVID, right? That's my opinion. And if you're, just because you're reading a bunch of books does not make you the expert. Just because, and I've said that during this pandemic, because that's something that
Yes.
I'm really sensitive about. Just because you read 1,000 books on how to sail the ocean does not make you a sailor.
Exactly.
That's it. Because you need to experience how to maneuver the oceans on a boat, not reading the book. Reading the book's not going to help you. So here we have people that are scientists at best, that have played with mice, that are talking about treating COVID, right? I mean, think about the CEO of Pfizer right now is a veterinarian. What is a veterinarian teaching me about immunology and treating or preventing COVID? Why? I mean, like, is my plumber going to do my colonoscopy now?
Sure.
I
Right.
mean,
Well,
exactly.
the plumber, he has a pipe. Maybe he can do my colonoscopy.
Well, but
That's
he
frightening.
identifies as a gastroenterologist.
There you go.
He's a plumber that identifies as a gastro. So he's
Maybe.
he's
where
a
we're at.
he's a
You're going deep there.
he's a trans
controversial.
gastroenterologist. I mean, you know, right?
That's,
Like, why
yeah,
not?
That's
Why don't we pick that scab?
Well, but that's the thing, right? I mean, everybody has their role in life, right?
Yes.
Like, I could probably put a website together, but I'm going to do a crazy job at it because that's not my job.
No, well, that's exactly right.
So
I tell medical students this all the time. If you're going to be a good doctor, you got to know what you don't know first.
Mhm.
That's because that's the stuff that'll kill people. When you think you know something that you don't know, you got
and you got to be humble. I think you got to be humble. Like, I'm the first one to say I don't know shit,
Me too.
but I'm willing to learn. Right.
Yeah. Well, you're going to have to be humble, or you're going to be humbled very quickly.
Yeah.
Well, in the microbiome space, there is no, I mean, it's such a vast, when you look at all these bugs and you realize you have to be humble because every bug has a partner, in the microbiome space. And we have not even touched on that. Right. And then it gets even more complex than that. It's not even about the microbiome, but it's about the microbes receptors on the colon too. So it's all specific. We all have all these perfect fingerprints, and we're all different in our fingerprints. But here we are different in our microbiome. That's the magic. To me, that's divine intervention. There is there is a God behind all this, because it is impossible. Man has yet to recreate blood, let alone figure out all this, right? So how about recreate blood and then tell me 100% that the vaccine is the solution for COVID?
No,
Yeah,
absolutely.
no. This is just.
It's so complex that
Man,
it's like mitochondria. It just blows my mind.
No,
how
that
it comes
exactly.
down to that.
And then
and we have so much to learn, guys. We have so much to learn. Right. I mean, I really think our bodies are designed to auto heal themselves. But we have not even tapped into that. Let's think about stem cells. Let's think about PRP, platelet-rich plasma, right? The fact that you could put platelet-rich plasma on your skull and grow hair. I mean, that's your own blood in action to regrow hair. And now we're talking about stools, that's huge. There's so much to learn. And we're wasting time on yesterday's technology of pushing vaccines and pushing drugs that are not working. We have not cured one disease except hepatitis C, maybe, and H. pylori, maybe. But think about it. Have we cured diabetes? Have we cured lupus? Have we cured arthritis? Have we cured Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, autism? No, all those are going higher.
Going up. Exactly.
No, they're going up.
It's insane.
But that's what's so crazy, because I have a talk I used to give, 10 years ago, and I talked about how technologies peak and then they plateau, and sometimes they virtually, once they've plateaued, they don't really change appreciably ever. So for instance, aviation went up almost like a logarithmic scale until about 1950 750, and then it just got marginally better after that. 1969 was the first 747 to go online and carry passengers. 1969. They just, I think last week, made the last one. It's the same airplane for almost 60 years.
There's UFOs out there.
Right.
You never...
but it's crazy because I've always said that healthcare, medicine, as far as really changing people's lives, plateaued at around 1960.
Yeah.
You could get your appendix out in 1960. You could get, cancer treatments weren't very good, but they were emerging, but
Right.
if you had a surgical cancer treatment, they could cure you. Orthopedic surgery was pretty good, not as good as it is now. But since then, there's definitely been increases, but they're marginal in comparison and wildly more expensive.
Right.
Like
Right.
wildly
Their
more
lifestyle
expensive.
modifications.
So now it's the time to look at the undefined terms, the seek and destroy method, and say, how do we get back to balance? Because now we can
That's what
fix
it takes.
we can fix broken legs, we can take out diseased, cancers. There's
Right.
lots of stuff that we can do that we should still be doing. But endless medications for chronic disease is clearly not the answer.
It's not a quality of life, I think. To have to remember every day to take a pill reminds you that you're sick. And, we have to start looking at quality of life versus quantity of life and make people have a
Yes.
better quality of life. I'm
agree.
not one to give tags to patients, and tell them, okay, you've got this chronic disease, and then they become the chronic disease, right? So I think it's important to give them hope and to give them like ways to basically manage their disease, rather than just keep putting them on these medications constantly. That just reminds them they're patients.
No, but that's what works for the financial model that we're in.
Yes.
Is make everyone, if everyone is sick, then everyone needs a pill. And if everyone needs a pill, then the system just continues to grind out a whole ton of money. And,
Right.
Hey, I got another quick question to throw your way before we let you go. So we've interviewed a ton of people on different diets, and I know you're really big on eating things that ferment in your gut to help the microbiome. What's your thoughts on some of these people that really thrive, like Michaela Peterson, with her rheumatoid arthritis, that went in this total meat diet and lion diet, basically, with the microbiome? Is it a genetic thing that some people can do, but not all, or what?
Yes, I think some people are, and I've said that before on some shows. Every species has a different microbiome, right? Every culture, every group of individuals within humanity are different humans, right? You've got your humans that are yogis, they're like into yoga, meditation, and they can't really handle too much. You've got your artists that are like at peace, calm, and they like to create. And then you've got your ER doctors that are basically high temperament and taking care of like 20 patients a day and crash and CPR and high level of stress, right? So every group has a different temperament. And I think that different temperament has a different diet and a different microbiome, personally.
That's a perfect answer to a big, complex question.
Yeah, and I think if you look at the animal kingdom, right? You look at the elephant, he's strolling around, he's happy, he's collecting dirt, he's eating the shrubs, he's breaking the ground. He's having these enormous dungs, and then he's replanting Africa with seeds in the dung. And then you've got the lion who's got blood in the stools, because I was collecting stools on a safari because I wanted to see what does the stool of the elephant look like compared to the lion. And so the lion only eats meat, right? I mean, he's a carnivore to the max, and svelte and strong, and basically the king of the jungle. And you look at out of his stools, and there's almost no stools there. I mean, it's all blood. It's all the blood of the animals, right? Wow. I mean, there's like, almost no fiber, nothing, right? So you look at those two species, and they're able to survive being who they are, right? Now, if the elephant starts eating the meat, I don't think the elephant's going to be able to survive. And if the lion is eating the grass, I don't think the lion's going to survive. So I think those people that have discovered that they are carnivores for them. And those people that have survived, that have discovered that their veggie eaters or plant-based diet is helping them, great. That means they were plant-based type, right? So I think there's a different type. And I think that's the mistake we make in the world is we globalize again. Everybody should be vegan. Everybody should be carnivore. You can't. There's different groups.
I love it.
But it's fascinating because the pushback we get when we ask that question is, well, yeah, but we're all not vegan because we all started on breast milk, and we're one species. We're not giraffes and lions. We're all human beings. But then again, you look at it and you go, how many gazillion years have people lived in different parts of the world that were only available for certain kinds of foods?
Correct.
And I think that you can say with high level of confidence that there's certain things that none of us should eat. I mean, obviously the highly processed garbage is killing everybody in the entire world. And
although the resilient microbiome survives that garbage process, because I have a few of my super donors. If you look at their diet, you would go, oh my God, what are they eating? But their microbiome is gold. And I can tell you, I don't know. I don't judge anymore because I'm like, you know what? If your microbiome looks like that, then you're resilient to garbage.
They're porcine. There you go.
Well, sweetie, mine is resilient to vodka, obviously. So we found the.
We haven't looked at it yet.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
You assume you have a golden microbiome.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm not. No way. I'm not speaking. I'm not pleading the fifth. Yeah.
So no, this has. I mean, we could go on forever. We have so much fun talking to you. This is
same here.
It's so informative though, because it's the theme is you got to be willing. You said my research is controversial. I said all research should be controversial.
100%.
That's the point.
100%.
If otherwise, it's just dumb. It's like
otherwise it's a business. It's not a research, and it's a propaganda, and it's a marketing. Okay, it's not research. Yeah. There is no right or wrong answers in research, and I'll quote Dr. Neil Stoneman on that. There are no right or wrong answers. It's all research. I could be right. I could be wrong. Doesn't matter. It's research. It's science. You want your scientists to be controversial. You want your scientists to say, let me tell you, during the pandemic, if everybody was like, oh yeah, the vaccine was the right way, we would have not seen what was happening in the microbiome. So it's a good thing I went the opposite way and said, well, I'm going to contradict that and I'm going to go the opposite way. Otherwise, everybody's following the same hypothesis. We're just selling stocks.
That's not
science. If you want to sell stocks, you might as well sell shampoos for a living, not medicine.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah, we could call this episode Shampoo.
Shampoo.
So, exactly. Yeah. Shit poo. So
shampoo. Shampoo. Poo. Oh my God!
I love it. Shampoo. It's a total sham.
Well, that was Ubiome. Ubiome was the shampoo.
Shampoo. Yeah. Perfect. That scientist is like rubbing me. She's contradicting all my papers and trying to annoy me. So, but that's another battle. That's the battle of companies that have fallen.
All right. So, well, thank you so much again.
It's no secret that medicine is a bit uptight. That's why Tim and I created BS Free MD, to mix things up a little and have fun in the process. Besides, we are having these exact same discussions all the time, so we thought we might as well invite everyone to the party. If you really like us, you can get plenty more and maybe see one of Tim's cool tattoos on our Instagram or Facebook pages at BS Free MD. See you next time.
While we try to keep BS Free MD as raw and real as possible, we can't be held responsible for any medical decisions or discussions had as a result of what you've heard on the show. We know, bummer. But the truth is, we really do care about your questions. So feel free to reach out to us by email at doc@bsfreemd.com.